There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday afternoon, a shared pot of coffee, a quiet drive home. They were the camouflage of the mundane, and only in retrospect, when you trace the map of your own heart, do you see them for what they were. The subtle shifting of tectonic plates, the first hairline fracture in the dam, the quiet turn of a key in a lock you never knew was there. For me, that moment, the one that cleaved my life into a before and an after, was the sound of his breathing in the dark of my living room. It was not the first time I had heard it, not by a long shot, but it was the first time the silence around it was so loud, so filled with the deafening roar of everything we had become and everything we were terrified to say. He was on the couch, as he had been for 97 consecutive nights. I counted. I'm a photographer. I noticed the details, the patterns, the slow bloom of a repeated gesture, and I was in the armchair, a sentinel in my own home, guarding a piece that felt as fragile as a shard of glass. He had said it an hour before, the words that hung in the air between us now, more tangible than the faint scent of rain on the window pane or the phantom smell of chlorine that always clung to him. I'm not into guys. It had been a clumsy, panicked declaration, a shield thrown up after a moment of what felt like impossible closeness, a near miss that had left us both breathless. And now, in the aftermath, he was asleep, or pretending to be. His retreat into stillness was a language I had learned to translate. It was his white flag, his brick wall, his hiding place. And I just watched him, my heart a slow, heavy drum against my ribs, and I thought about how he got here. I thought about how a simple act of kindness, of friendship, had slowly, imperceptibly, become a sprawling, complicated architecture of need and fear, and a hope so fierce it felt like its own kind of pain. I met Liam 3 years ago, during the autumn semester of my final year of college. The campus was a riot of gold and crimson, the air crisp with the promise of change, and I was obsessed with capturing it. Not the grand, sweeping vistas that ended up on university brochures, but the small, forgotten moments. The way the late afternoon sun caught the dust motes dancing in the library stacks, the pattern of cracked paint on a forgotten bench, the reflection of a hurried student in a puddle after a sudden downpour. My camera was less a tool and more an extension of my own quiet nature, a way to engage with the world from a safe distance, to observe without having to participate. I was a ghost on campus, and I preferred it that way. My work was my voice, my darkroom my sanctuary. The university magazine had given me an assignment, one I took with my usual resigned sigh. Human interest, my editor, a perpetually stressed journalism major named Chloe, had called it. I was to do a photo essay on the swim team, chronicling their journey to the national championships. To me, it sounded like a special circle of hell. The sterile, echoing natatorium, the overwhelming smell of chlorine, the loud, boisterous energy of athletes. It was the antithesis of everything I sought in my own life and in my art. But a paying gig was a paying gig, and it beat shooting another series on interesting doorknobs, which had been my passion project for the better part of a month. The first day I went to the pool, I felt like an anthropologist discovering a new, bewildering tribe. The air was thick and humid, a tropical climate manufactured in the heart of New England. The sound was a cacophony of splashes, whistles, and shouts that bounced off the tiled walls, amplifying into a disorienting roar. And the swimmers themselves were a blur of sleek, powerful motion, gods of this small, watery kingdom. They moved with a grace and violence that was mesmerizing. I stayed on the periphery, my longest lens attached to my camera, trying to find my shot, my story, in the chaos. And then I saw him. Liam. He wasn't the captain, nor was he the one with the most medals, at least not at first. But there was something different about the way he moved. Others cut through the water. He seemed to become a part of it. There was a fluidity to his form, a quiet intensity in the set of his jaw, that stood out even in a pool full of champions. When he was out of the water, he was just as noticeable, but for a different reason. While his teammates were a vortex of loud jokes and towel snapping, Liam often stood slightly apart, stretching with a focused solitude, his gaze distant. He had a smile that could light up the entire humid, echoing space, but it didn't always reach his eyes. His eyes were a deep, thoughtful blue, the color of the ocean just before a storm, and they held a hint of something I recognized because I saw it in the mirror every morning, a well-guarded loneliness. I spent weeks observing them, observing him. My initial photos were what you'd expect. Action shots of churning water, the strain on a swimmer's face as they reached for the wall. They were technically proficient, but emotionally sterile. Chloe said they were great, but I knew they were hollow. I hadn't found the story yet. I was still on the outside. The change came one afternoon when I stayed late, long after the official practice had ended. Most of the team had cleared out, but a few remained, including Liam. He was just floating on his back in the middle of the massive pool, the water utterly still around him, his arms spread wide, his eyes closed. The setting sun streamed through the high, clear-story windows, illuminating him in a single, golden beam. The entire, cavernous space was silent except for the gentle lapping of water against the sides of the pool. He looked peaceful, but also profoundly solitary, a single island in a vast, silent sea. I lifted my camera, my hands moving on pure instinct. I didn't use the long lens. I walked to the edge of the pool, knelt down, and used my standard 50 millimeters, the one that captures the world roughly as the human eye sees it. I took one picture. Just one. In the frame, he was perfectly centered, a study in tranquility and isolation. The light, the stillness, the vulnerability of the pose, it was all there. It was the first honest picture I had taken for the entire project. When the shutter clicked, the sound was unnaturally loud in the silence. His eyes snapped open. He didn't seem startled, just aware. He looked over at me, treading water now, his gaze questioning. "Sorry," I said, my voice feeling small. "I didn't mean to disturb you." He swam to the edge, his movements slow and deliberate, and rested his arms on the deck. Water streamed from his hair, down his face. "It's fine," he said. His voice was lower than I expected, a gentle rumble. "Just winding down. You're the camera guy, right?" "Ethan." I was surprised he knew my name. I nodded. "Yeah, Ethan. You're always here," he observed, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. "You're quiet." "It's sort of a professional requirement," I said, managing a small smile. "Hard to sneak up on a moment if you're yelling." He laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound was warm and genuine. It reached his eyes. "I guess so. Can I see?" He gestured towards the camera. I hesitated. I never showed people my photos on the camera's tiny screen. The light is always wrong, the resolution poor. It's like showing someone the pencil sketch for a masterpiece oil painting. But he was looking at me with such open curiosity that I found myself kneeling beside him, angling the screen so he could see. I showed him the picture I had just taken. He was silent for a long time, just looking at it. The water dripped from his chin onto the tiled floor, each drop a tiny, distinct sound. I started to get nervous, bracing for him to say it was weird or to ask me to delete it. "Wow," he finally breathed out, his voice barely a whisper. Is that really what I look like?" "That's what I saw," I answered honestly. He trailed off, searching for the word. "Alone." He didn't say it with self-pity. He said it with a kind of detached surprise, as if he were seeing a fundamental truth about himself for the first time. That was the moment our friendship began, not with a handshake or a formal introduction, but with a shared moment of vulnerability over a single, captured image. He saw that I saw him, not just the athlete, but the person underneath, and I saw that he was willing to be seen. From that day on, things were different. He'd seek me out before or after practice. Asking to see the shot of the day, he started explaining the nuances of the sport to me, the strategy of a relay, the brutal conditioning, the mental game. In return, I explained photography to him, the relationship between aperture and shutter speed, the magic of the darkroom, the search for the decisive moment. We were two people from different worlds, teaching each other our languages. Our conversations became the new focal point of my project. The story wasn't about the team, it was about him. It was about the contrast between the public champion and the private, introspective young man. The photo essay, when I finally submitted it, was a success. The centerpiece was the shot of him floating alone in the pool, surrounded by smaller, more intimate photos. Liam, head in his hands after a disappointing time trial. Liam, laughing with a teammate, his face open and unguarded. Liam, looking directly into my lens, his blue eyes full of a quiet, unreadable intelligence. The magazine ran it as a 6-page spread. It won a collegiate award. More importantly, it solidified my friendship with Liam. We started spending time together outside of the pool. We'd grab food, study in the library, or just walk around campus, talking for hours. I learned about his life, the immense pressure from his father, a former Olympic hopeful, to succeed. I learned about his girlfriend, Sarah, a bright, bubbly girl in the cheerleading squad who seemed, from my perspective, to love the idea of Liam the champion more than Liam the person. And he, in turn, learned about me. He learned about my quiet, solitary childhood, my passion for finding beauty in the overlooked, my dream of one day having a gallery show. He was the first person I ever showed my collection of doorknob photos to. He didn't laugh. He spent 10 minutes studying them, then pointed to a close-up of a rusted, ornate knob and said, "This one. It looks like it has stories to tell." He got it. He got me. And that was dangerous. Because somewhere along the way, between the smell of chlorine and the click of my shutter, I had fallen in love with him. It was a quiet, hopeless kind of love, the kind you nurture in secret because its exposure would surely kill it. I knew he was straight. He had Sarah. He talked about a future that was a perfect, pre-drawn map. Graduate, get a good job, marry Sarah, have 25 kids, a dog, and a house in the suburbs. My world, my feelings, had no place on that map. So I buried them. I buried them deep, under layers of casual friendship and easy camaraderie. I became an expert in emotional camouflage. I was his buddy, his confidant, the guy he came to for a perspective outside his jock-centric world. I was the quiet observer, and I resigned myself to the role. Loving Liam from a distance was better than not having him in my life at all. The friendship was the most important thing. I would never, ever risk it. The shift, when it came, was not a sudden earthquake, but a slow, grinding inevitability. It began, as so many stories do, with a broken heart. His, not mine. It was the spring of our senior year, a few months after my photo essay had been published. The pressure of graduation and the future was a low-grade hum beneath everything. Liam was more stressed than I'd ever seen him. The national championships were approaching, and his relationship with Sarah was fraying at the edges. From my vantage point, it was obvious. Their conversations, which I was sometimes party to, were strained. She talked about post-graduation plans, a shared apartment in Boston, guest lists for parties he didn't want to attend. He just nodded, his eyes taking on that familiar, distant look. He was floating again, but this time he was drowning. The breakup happened on a rainy Tuesday in April. He called me, his voice thick. "Can I come over?" He didn't need to say more. When I opened my apartment door, he looked wrecked. His face was pale, his hair was soaked, and he was shivering, though the air wasn't particularly cold. He was still wearing his team jacket, the fabric dark with rain. He walked past me into my small living room and just stood there, dripping on my old hardwood floors, looking lost. "It's over," he said, the words barely audible. "Sarah and me. It's done." I didn't say, "I'm sorry," because I wasn't. I didn't say, "I told you so," because I hadn't. I just said, "Okay." I took his wet jacket and hung it by the door. I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on. I came back with a towel and handed it to him. He took it without a word and began to dry his hair, the movements mechanical. He sank onto my worn-out sofa, the one I'd inherited from my grandmother, and stared at the opposite wall, where a large print of my favorite doorknob photo hung. "She said I'm distant," he said to the photo. "She said I'm emotionally unavailable, that I live in my own head, that it's like I'm always holding something back." The words came out in a flat, monotone whisper. He was reciting the charges against him, trying to make them make sense. "She's not wrong." He finally looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, as if I held the answer key to his own heart. "Am I?" he asked. "Am I distant?" "Sometimes," I said, choosing my words carefully. I sat in the armchair across from him, my usual spot. "But I always figured you just had a lot on your mind. It's like, there's a door inside me," he struggled to explain, unknowingly tapping into my own private lexicon of metaphors. "And it's locked, and I don't even know what's behind it. I just know that everyone I care about is on the outside of it." He looked down at his hands, turning them over as if he'd never seen them before. "She said I never really let her in." "Not really." The kettle whistled, a shrill, piercing sound that broke the tension. I made him tea, strong and sweet, the way he liked it. He drank it, his hands shaking slightly around the mug. He didn't cry. It was worse than crying. It was a hollowed-out emptiness that seemed to absorb all the light and warmth in the room. He talked for hours, not a torrent, but a slow, painful drip of words. He talked about the pressure, the expectations, the feeling of performing a life instead of living it. He never said he loved her. He talked about loving the idea of her, the idea of the life they were supposed to have. He was mourning a future he was never even sure he wanted. When he finally ran out of words, the room fell silent again. The rain had stopped. The only sound was the hum of my refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock on the mantelpiece. It was late, past 2 in the morning. "I should go," he said, but he made no move to get up. He looked exhausted, emotionally flayed. The thought of him going back to his empty dorm room, with its posters of swimmers and the lingering ghost of Sarah's perfume, felt cruel. "You can stay," I said, the words coming out before I had a chance to second-guess them. "The couch is, well, it's a couch, but you're welcome to it." He looked at me, a flicker of something, gratitude, relief, in his tired eyes. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," I said, and I meant it. "Get some sleep, Liam." I grabbed a pillow and a blanket from my linen closet and tossed them onto the couch. He mumbled a thank you, already curling up, pulling the blanket around his shoulders. I turned off the main lights, leaving only the small lamp on my desk lit. I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me, and leaned against it, my own heart aching with a complicated mix of sympathy for him and a selfish, terrible hope for myself. I told myself I was just being a good friend. That's all it was. But as I lay in my own bed, listening for the sound of his breathing from the other room, I knew, deep down, that a line had been crossed. He had come to me for shelter from his storm, and I had let him in. That night was the beginning of the ritual. He went home the next morning, after a cup of my notoriously bad coffee and an awkward thank you. I thought that would be the end of it, a one-time crisis. But he came back the next night, and the night after that. He didn't call first anymore. He would just appear at my door around 10 o'clock, after his late practice and his study groups, looking like a soldier returning from a war. He'd have a textbook in his hand, a pretense of studying, but we both knew why he was there. He was running from the silence of his own room. My small, cluttered apartment, with its smell of darkroom chemicals and brewing tea, had become his sanctuary. The first week, he slept on the couch every night. I'd wake up in the morning to find him there, a tangle of limbs and blanket, his hair sticking up in a dozen different directions. I would make coffee, and the smell would usually wake him. We'd sit in near silence, him sipping from his mug, me pretending to read, the unspoken things between us filling the space. Then he'd leave for his morning classes, and the apartment would feel cavernous and empty without him. It was a strange, new domesticity we had fallen into, a pantomime of a life together, built on the foundation of his heartbreak and my secret love. I was his harbor, and I didn't know if I was helping him heal or just enabling him to hide. My life began to revolve around this new routine. I found myself rushing home after my classes, making sure the apartment was clean, that there was food in the fridge, that the tea he liked was in the cupboard. I was nesting, preparing the sanctuary for his arrival. My own work began to suffer. I spent less time in the darkroom and more time staring at the door, waiting for his knock. My friends, the few I had, started to ask where I'd been. I made excuses. I was busy with a project. I wasn't feeling well. I couldn't explain it to them, because I could barely explain it to myself. How do you tell someone that your entire existence has been reoriented around the gravitational pull of another person's sadness? The second week, the ritual escalated. It was a Thursday, and a late-season cold snap had descended on the city. He arrived looking frozen, his hands blue. My ancient radiator was putting up a valiant, but ultimately losing fight against the chill seeping through the old window frames. He was huddled on the couch, wrapped in his blanket, but he was still shivering. "I'm so cold," he chattered, his teeth clicking together. I did something I would later spend hours, days, weeks analyzing. I went to my room, grabbed the heavy down comforter from my own bed, and brought it out to him. "Here," I said, draping it over him. "This should be warmer." He burrowed into it gratefully. "Thanks, E," he murmured, his voice muffled by the thick quilt. "You're a lifesaver." I sat in my armchair, watching him, a book open in my lap, the words unread. He was still shivering. After about 10 minutes of listening to his teeth chatter, I sighed, a sound of pure exasperation, mostly with myself. "This is ridiculous," I said, more to myself than to him. "My couch is a block of ice. Just, come on." He looked at me, confused. "Come on where?" "My bed is warmer than the couch," I said, the words feeling foreign and heavy in my mouth. "It's big enough. You take one side, I'll take the other. It's just for warmth. It's just practical." I was babbling, justifying, building a fortress of logic around an act that felt anything but. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to feel a hot flush of panic and regret. I was about to backtrack, to say, "Never mind, stupid idea," when he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice small. "If you're sure." I wasn't sure of anything. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But I nodded back, projecting a confidence I was nowhere near feeling. I led the way into my bedroom. It was as small and cluttered as the rest of the apartment, dominated by a queen-sized bed, bookshelves overflowing with photography collections, and prints taped to the walls. It was the most personal space I had, the inner sanctum, and I had just invited him in. The awkwardness was a physical presence in the room. We were two friends who had spent countless hours together, but suddenly we were strangers, navigating a new and treacherous territory. I gave him an old t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants to sleep in, then retreated to the bathroom to change, giving us both a moment to breathe. When I came back, he was already in bed, on the side furthest from the door, lying rigidly on his back, his hands folded on his chest. He looked like a knight on a tomb. I had built a wall of pillows down the center of the bed, a clear, delineated boundary, the DMZ of our friendship. I got in on my side, the mattress dipping under my weight. I turned off the light. The darkness was absolute, save for the faint orange glow of a streetlight filtering through the blinds, casting stripes across the ceiling. The silence was even more profound than it had been in the living room. All I could hear was the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears, and his breathing, slow and steady and impossibly close. "Ethan," he whispered into the dark, his voice sounding very near. "Yeah." My voice was a croak. "Thanks," he said. "For everything." "It's nothing," I lied. "Go to sleep, Liam." He didn't reply. I lay there for what felt like hours, perfectly still, hyper-aware of his presence just inches away. I could feel the heat radiating from his body across the no-man's land of pillows. I could smell the clean, soapy scent of my own t-shirt on him, mingled with that faint, persistent trace of chlorine that was uniquely his. It was excruciating. It was exquisite. It was the most intense form of torture I could have possibly designed for myself. Eventually, his breathing deepened into the slow, even rhythm of sleep. Only then did I allow myself to relax, my own body finally unclenching. I had survived the first night. This became the new ritual. He would arrive, we would talk, and then we would retreat to my bedroom. The pretense of the cold couch was quickly forgotten. It was simply what we did now. The wall of pillows remained for the first few nights, a silent testament to our shared anxiety. Then, one night, I forgot to build it, and he didn't say anything. The boundary had been dissolved without a word. We still slept on our respective sides of the bed, two separate islands in a sea of white sheets, but the distance between us had shrunk. The nights took on a pattern. We'd lie in the dark, and he would talk. He'd tell me about his day, about the frustrating drills, about a professor who was writing him, about his anxieties for the future. He was using the darkness as a confessional, the anonymity of it allowing him to speak truths he couldn't in the light of day. I was his priest, his therapist, his silent witness. I mostly listened, offering a quiet murmur of agreement or a simple question to prompt him further. I was afraid that if I said too much, I would break the spell. One night, he was talking about his father, about the crushing weight of his expectations. His voice was tight, with a pain he rarely showed. "He doesn't see me," Liam said, his voice cracking. "He just sees the stopwatch. He sees a version of himself he wants to fix, on impulse." I reached across the small space between us and put my hand on his arm, a simple, comforting gesture. His skin was warm. He stopped talking instantly. The silence stretched, taut, and electric. I thought I had made a terrible mistake. I started to pull my hand away, but his hand came up and covered mine, holding it there. He didn't say anything. He just held my hand on his arm, his thumb stroking absently over my knuckles. We fell asleep like that, our hands clasped together in the dark. The physical boundaries, once so rigid, began to blur, dissolving slowly like sugar in water. A hand clasp in the dark became a foot brushing against mine. A foot brushing against mine became him turning over in his sleep and his arm landing across my chest. The first time it happened, I lay awake for hours, my heart pounding, his arm a dead weight of impossible significance. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, for fear of waking him, of ending the moment. In the morning, he woke up, realized his position, and pulled away with a mumbled, embarrassed apology. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Soon, the apologies stopped. It was just another part of the ritual. He was a restless sleeper, plagued by dreams I could only guess at. He would toss and turn, his limbs tangling with mine. Sometimes he would murmur things in his sleep, fragments of conversations, names. Never Sarah's. Sometimes my name. I would lie still, pretending to be asleep, my mind racing. Was this just the unconscious seeking of warmth and comfort, a purely physical act devoid of meaning? Or was it something more? Was his subconscious reaching for me in a way his conscious mind never could? I was a detective gathering clues, a scholar poring over a sacred, incomprehensible text. Every touch, every sigh, every shift in his weight was a piece of evidence I would analyze and reanalyze in the lonely hours of the day. My apartment, my room, my bed. It had become our bubble, a world outside of the world, with its own rules and its own language, a language spoken not in words but in proximity and touch. The door to my bedroom, which I had once closed so firmly, was now always left open. It was an invitation, a statement. This space is our space. But outside that bubble, the old rules still applied. On campus, we were just friends. We'd walk together, eat together, but we never touched. A hand on the arm, a casual hug, gestures that were common among our peers, felt charged, forbidden. We had built a world of intense physical intimacy that could only exist behind a closed door, in the dark. It was a paradox that was starting to tear me apart. The hope that bloomed in the dark of my bedroom would wilt and die in the harsh sunlight of the real world. I was living a double life, and the strain was becoming unbearable. I was in love with a man who slept in my arms every night and didn't even know it. Or worse, maybe he did know, and was simply using my affection as a balm for his own wounds, a temporary comfort he would discard when he was healed. The thought was a cold knot of dread in my stomach. The crossing, the moment the bubble finally burst, happened on a Saturday night in late May. It was the night before the national championships, the culmination of his entire college athletic career. He was a live wire of nervous energy. He had been bouncing off the walls of my apartment all day, unable to sit still, unable to focus. He tried to study, but just stared at the same page for an hour. He tried to watch a movie, but got up every 10 minutes to pace. "I feel like I'm going to vibrate apart," he said, running a hand through his hair for the 100th time. "You're ready for this, Liam," I said, my voice calm and steady, a counterpoint to his frantic energy. "You've been working for this for 4 years. What if I fail?" he asked, his voice small, the bravado gone. He looked at me, his blue eyes wide with a terrifying vulnerability. "What if I'm not good enough?" "You are good enough," I said, with a certainty that surprised even me. "It doesn't matter what the stopwatch says tomorrow. You are already good enough." He stared at me, his frantic energy finally stilling. He walked over to where I was sitting in my armchair and sank to the floor, resting his head on my knees, like a weary dog. It was a gesture of such complete trust, of such profound surrender, that it took my breath away. I instinctively started running my fingers through his hair, the way I had seen my mother do to me when I was a child and had a fever. The motion was slow, rhythmic, calming. He closed his eyes and leaned into my touch, a low sigh escaping his lips. We stayed like that for a long time, the only sound the soft rasp of my fingers in his hair and the ticking of the clock. The frantic energy in the room had been replaced by a deep, humming quiet. The sun had set, and the room was bathed in the deep blue of twilight. He hadn't moved. His breathing was slow and even. I thought he might have fallen asleep. He said, his voice a low murmur against my jeans. He didn't open his eyes. "Yeah. Stay with me tonight," he said. Don't go to your side of the bed. Just stay." My heart stopped. It was the first time he had ever explicitly asked for it. It was always him drifting over in his sleep, an act that could be written off as unconscious. This was different. This was a choice. A request. Okay, I whispered, my throat tight. Okay, Liam. Later, we were in bed. The room was dark, but the moon was bright, and it cast a pale, silvery light through the window, illuminating the space enough to see. We were lying on our sides, facing each other. The pretense was gone. There was no DMZ, no separate islands. We were just two people, inches apart. I could see the light catch in his eyes. He was just looking at me, his gaze intense and unreadable. He reached out a hand and gently, so gently, traced the line of my jaw with his fingertips. His touch was electric, a spark on my skin. What are you always thinking about? He whispered. You're always watching. Always thinking. I want to know what's going on in there. He tapped my temple lightly. My heart was a frantic drum. I'm thinking about you. I'm always thinking about you. I'm thinking about how much I love you and how this is killing me. The words were a scream in my head, but I couldn't say them. I couldn't risk it. Not tonight. Not when he was this fragile. So I said, I'm thinking about light and shadows and how you can't have one without the other. It was the truth. Just not the whole truth. He smiled, a small, sad smile. A photographer's answer. He was silent for a moment, his fingers still resting on my cheek. His thumb began to stroke my skin, a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Ethan, he whispered, and my name sounded like a prayer on his lips. Liam, I whispered back. His eyes flickered down to my mouth, then back up to my eyes. The space between us crackled. The air grew thick, heavy. It felt like the moment before a lightning strike, that strange, metallic taste in the air, the hair on your arms standing on end. He was asking a question with his eyes, a question so huge and terrifying that it couldn't be spoken aloud. And in the silence, I answered him. I didn't move away. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, my own heart in my eyes, and I let him see it. I let him see everything. He moved slowly, tentatively, giving me every opportunity to pull back. He closed the last few inches between us, and his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It wasn't hungry or demanding. It was soft. It was hesitant. It was a question, a confession, and an apology all at once. It was the taste of salt from his skin and the sweetness of the tea we had shared earlier. It was the culmination of months of unspoken words and unacknowledged touches. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing I had ever experienced. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. His eyes were closed. Okay, he breathed out, the word a puff of warm air against my lips. Okay. He kissed me again, and this time it was firmer, more certain. And I kissed him back. I poured every unspoken feeling, every lonely night, every secret hope into that kiss. It was a release, a dam breaking, a flood of emotion that had been held back for so long. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He didn't pull away. He just wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest, and held me tight. I buried my face in the crook of his neck, breathing in his scent, the chlorine, the soap, the uniquely Liam-ness of him. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched my own. We didn't say another word. We just held each other, two separate, lonely islands that had finally, impossibly, drifted together and become one. I fell asleep in his arms, feeling, for the first time in a very long time, completely and utterly safe. I thought it was a beginning. I had no idea it was just a different kind of storm. The morning after was a study in brutal, jarring sunlight. I woke up first, tangled in his limbs, my head on his chest, his arms slung possessively over my waist. For a few blissful, drowsy seconds, I forgot the monumental shift that had occurred. I just felt warm and safe and at peace. Then memory came rushing back in, and my heart gave a little flutter of nervous joy. I looked at his sleeping face, the peaceful expression, the way his eyelashes brushed his cheeks. He looked younger, softer, without the constant tension he carried during the day. I wanted to photograph him like this, to capture this unguarded moment of peace. I wanted to memorize it forever. But then he started to stir. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they were hazy with sleep. He looked at me, and a slow, sleepy smile spread across his face. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice thick. And then, he woke up completely. His eyes focused. He became aware of where he was, of how we were positioned. And I watched it happen. I watched the panic flood his eyes, like a tide coming in, swift and merciless. The smile vanished. The warmth receded. He went from a soft, sleeping boy to a cornered animal in the space of a single heartbeat. He scrambled back, disentangling himself from me so quickly he almost fell off the bed. He started, his voice a panicked rasp. "I have to go. The meet. I'm gonna be late for the warm-ups." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking everywhere else. At the wall, at the floor, at the door. Anywhere but at me. "Liam," I said, my voice gentle, trying to anchor him. "It's okay." "No, it's not," he snapped, his voice sharp with a fear that was quickly curdling into anger. He was already pulling on his clothes from the day before, his movements jerky and frantic. Last night, it was a mistake. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything. Each word was a physical blow. A mistake. Didn't mean anything. I felt the beautiful, fragile world we had built last night shatter into a million pieces around me. I sat up in bed, the sheets pooling around my waist, suddenly feeling cold and exposed. "A mistake?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "That's what it was." "Yes," he said, jamming his feet into his shoes without untying them. He finally looked at me, but his eyes were hard, guarded. The vulnerability from last night was gone, locked away behind a steel door. "Look, Ethan, I was messed up. You've been a great friend through all this stuff with Sarah, and I took advantage. I'm sorry, but you have to understand." He took a deep breath, and then he delivered the final, fatal blow. The words I knew were coming, but still prayed I would never have to hear. "I'm not into guys," he said, the words flat and final. "I'm not gay." He said it as if he were trying to convince himself as much as me. He said it like a mantra, a shield to ward off the terrifying complexity of what had happened between us. He said it, and then he fled. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say, "I'll see you at the meet." He just turned and walked out of my bedroom, out of my apartment, and out of the fragile, hopeful world we had created. I heard the front door click shut behind him, and the sound echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the room. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there, in the wreckage of the morning, the scent of him still on my pillows. The sunlight streaming through the window felt like an accusation. I felt like a fool, a naive, hopeful fool. He had used me. He had used my affection, my home, my bed, as a temporary refuge, and the moment he felt threatened by the implications, he had burned the whole thing to the ground. The pain was sharp and clean, a deep, surgical cut to the heart. But underneath the pain, there was a simmering anger. Anger at him, for his cowardice, and anger at myself, for letting him in, for believing his unspoken promises, for daring to hope. I didn't go to the meet. I couldn't. I couldn't sit in a crowd and cheer for him, pretending that my heart wasn't lying in pieces on my bedroom floor. I spent the day in a haze of misery. I stripped the bed, washing the sheets to get his scent out of them. I put the comforter back on my bed, the one that had started it all. I tried to work in my darkroom, but the smell of the chemicals made me nauseous. The entire apartment felt contaminated by his memory. Every surface held the ghost of his touch. The couch where he first slept. The armchair where I watched him. The kitchen counter where we'd drink our morning coffee. The doorknob he'd complimented. It was all haunted. He won. I saw it on the campus news website that evening. There was a picture of him, standing on the podium, a gold medal around his neck, his arms raised in triumph. He was smiling, that big, bright, public smile. He looked like the champion everyone expected him to be. He looked happy. He looked like he hadn't a care in the world. And I hated him for it. The avoidance began in earnest. He didn't come back to my apartment. He didn't call. He didn't text. For a week, it was complete radio silence. I saw him on campus once, from a distance. He was with his teammates, laughing, and for a second, our eyes met across the quad. I saw a flicker of panic in his face before he looked away, turning his back to me to engage in an overly animated conversation with someone else. The message was clear. I was a ghost. Our 97 nights, our shared secrets in the dark, the kiss that had felt so real, it was all to be erased. It had never happened. The anger started to fade, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. The loss of the potential romance was painful, yes, but the loss of my best friend was unbearable. I missed his stupid jokes. I missed the way he'd explain the physics of a perfect dive. I missed his presence, the simple, solid fact of him in my space. The silence in my apartment was no longer peaceful. It was just empty. After 2 weeks of this agonizing silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I had to have a real conversation, not a panicked, middle-of-the-night flight. I needed to understand. I needed him to look me in the eye and tell me that what we had was nothing. I needed to hear the lie from up close, to see if he could even manage it. So I went to find him. I knew he had a late-night training session, a post-season wind-down. I went to the natatorium, the place where it had all begun. The pool was empty and quiet, just as it had been that first day. The water was a placid, turquoise sheet under the fluorescent lights. He was there, just as I knew he would be. He was sitting on the edge of the diving platform, his feet dangling in the water, his back to me. He was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller without the weight of expectation on him. He looked lonely. I walked to the edge of the pool, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He heard me coming and stiffened, but he didn't turn around. "Go away, Ethan," he said, his voice flat. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "We're going to talk. Right now." He was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound of pure defeat, and turned to face me. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes. He had lost weight. The triumphant champion from the news photo was gone. In his place was the lost, haunted boy from the night of the breakup. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his gaze fixed on the water. "Isn't there?" I challenged, my voice rising with the frustration I had been bottling up for weeks. 2.5 months, Liam. You spent 2.5 months in my apartment. In my bed. You held my hand. You laid your head in my lap. You kissed me. And then you tell me it was a mistake and you're not into guys and you run. You don't get to do that. You don't get to just disappear and pretend it didn't happen. I deserve more than that. Our friendship deserved more than that. Tears were welling in my eyes, hot and angry. I didn't care. I wanted him to see them. I wanted him to see the mess he had made. He finally looked at me, and his own eyes were glistening. "What do you want me to say, Ethan?" he asked, his voice cracking. "That I'm confused? That I'm scared? That I lie awake every night in my stupid, empty room and I miss you so much it feels like I can't breathe? Is that what you want to hear?" "I want to hear the truth," I said, my voice softening. "Whatever it is." He looked away again, running a hand over his face. He was quiet for a long time, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the sides of the pool. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know what the truth is," he admitted. "Everything you said is true. I did all those things. And when I was with you, in your apartment, it was the only time in months I felt safe. The only time I didn't feel like I was drowning. And that night, the kiss, it felt right. It felt more real than anything I've ever felt in my life." He choked on the words, a sob catching in his throat. "And that terrifies me." He looked up at me, his face a mask of anguish and confusion. "All my life, I've had a map," he said, echoing his own words from months ago. "A map that was drawn for me. Graduate, swim, get a job, marry a girl. And you're not on the map. Nothing about how I feel about you is on the map. And I don't know what to do with it. It feels like if I take one step in that direction, my whole world will fall apart." We just stood there, on opposite sides of this chasm of fear and confusion that had opened up between us. The air was thick with everything that had been left unsaid for so long. He was looking at me with a desperate, pleading expression, and then he asked the question that would change everything, again, the question that revealed the tangled, terrified logic of his heart. "Why?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why did you never say anything? All those nights. I was a wreck. I was there, in your bed. Why did you never push? Why did you never try to change my mind?" The question hung in the air between us. It was absurd. It was unfair. He was blaming me for my own patience, for my respect for his boundaries, for the gentle way I had held his heart. He was asking why I hadn't forced an issue he himself was too terrified to face. A part of me wanted to scream at him, to rage at the injustice of it. But then I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the scared kid behind the champion's facade. I saw the boy who felt so out of control of his own life that he was wishing someone else had taken the wheel. And the anger dissolved, replaced by a wave of profound, aching tenderness. I took a deep breath. I walked over to where he was sitting on the edge of the platform and sat down next to him, our legs dangling over the water, not touching. Because it wasn't my mind to change, Liam, I said, my voice soft and clear in the echoing space. I'm a photographer. I document what's there. I don't stage the shot. I wait for the real moment. I saw you. I saw your fear and your confusion and your pain. And pushing you would have been about what I wanted, not about what you needed. I finally turned to look at him. He was already looking at me, his eyes wide, hanging on my every word. I didn't want to change your mind, I continued, the words coming straight from the deepest, most honest part of me. I didn't fall in love with a project I could fix. I fell in love with you. The whole, messy, confused, brilliant you. And all I wanted was to create a space where you felt safe enough to figure out what you wanted. I didn't want to change you. I just wanted you to be you. And if that you didn't want me, it would have hurt. It did hurt. But I would have accepted it. Because I love you. And love, real love, isn't about changing someone. It's about seeing them clearly and loving them anyway. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty or awkward. It was full. It was the silence of understanding, of a profound truth finally being spoken aloud. He stared at me, and I watched as a million different emotions washed over his face. Shock, relief, guilt, and finally, a dawning, wondrous clarity. The defenses he had built so carefully, the walls of denial and fear, they didn't just crack. They crumbled. They turned to dust. Tears started to stream down his face, silent and steady. He didn't try to wipe them away. He just let them fall. And then he did something that felt more intimate than any kiss. He reached out and took my hand. His fingers laced with mine, a perfect fit. His hand was cold and damp from the pool water, but I held it tightly. I'm so sorry, Ethan, he whispered, his voice thick with tears. I'm so sorry I hurt you. I was so scared. I am so scared. I know, I said, squeezing his hand. It's okay to be scared. No, he said, shaking his head, his grip on my hand tightening. It's not okay. It's not okay that I ran. It's not okay that I let my fear hurt the one person who has only ever been kind to me. He took a shuddering breath and finally, looked me square in the eye. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something new. A flicker of resolve. A spark of courage. I don't know what this means. I don't know who I am. The map is gone, and I'm lost. But I think the only thing that feels like true north is you. He leaned in, just as he had that night in my bed, slowly, tentatively. He paused, inches from my face, asking the same question with his eyes. But this time, it was different. We were not in the dark. We were under the harsh, honest fluorescent lights of the real world. And this time, I didn't just wait for him to answer his own question. I met him halfway. I leaned in and closed the final distance, and our lips met in a kiss that was clumsy and salty with tears and utterly, breathtakingly perfect. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion or desperate confusion. It was a kiss of homecoming. A quiet, certain promise. We didn't need to talk anymore after that. Not right away. The kiss had said everything. We just sat there, for how long I don't know, holding hands, our shoulders pressed together, watching the water ripple under the lights. The vast, echoing natatorium no longer felt like his world or my world. It felt like ours. A place of endings and new beginnings. Eventually, the chill in the air got to us. He stood up, pulling me with him, his hand still firmly clasped in mine. He didn't let go. He didn't let go as we walked out of the natatorium, into the cool night air. He didn't let go as we walked across the deserted campus, our footsteps the only sound. And he didn't let go when we arrived at the door to my apartment, the sanctuary he had fled and had now returned to. He paused at the door, turning to me. The moonlight caught the lingering dampness on his cheeks. Are you sure? He asked, his voice quiet. He wasn't asking if I was sure I wanted him here. He was asking if I was sure about him. If I was sure I could handle the mess, the confusion, the journey we were about to embark on. I didn't answer with words. I simply squeezed his hand, unlocked the door, and led him inside. That night, the ritual was reborn, but it was transformed. There was no hesitation, no pillow wall, no unspoken rules. When we went to my room, it was with a shared, quiet intention. He crawled into bed and immediately opened his arms. I went into them without a second thought. It felt like coming home. Lying there, in the familiar dark, his arms wrapped around me, my head on his chest, I could feel the frantic, frightened rhythm of his heart beginning to slow, to find a new, calmer beat that matched my own. "I'm still scared," he whispered into my hair. "Me too," I confessed. And it was true. This was new territory for both of us. A map we would have to draw together, line by painful, beautiful line. "But," he said, his arms tightening around me, "I'm more scared of being without you." And that, I realized, was the final piece. It wasn't about labels or maps or what other people would think. It was about choosing to face the fear together. It was about finding that one person who made the terrifying unknown feel less like a threat and more like an adventure. The days that followed were a delicate, beautiful dance of rediscovery. We were learning a new language, one spoken in gentle touches and shared glances over morning coffee, and the simple, profound comfort of sleeping and waking up next to the person you love. He was still Liam, the athlete with the weight of the world on his shoulders, and I was still Ethan, the quiet observer with a camera. But we were different, too. He started to let me see the cracks in his champion's armor, and I started to let him see the world through my lens, not as an observer, but as a participant. We began to heal, not just from the wounds we had inflicted on each other, but from the older, deeper wounds we had been carrying alone. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. We had found our decisive moment, not in a single click of a shutter, but in the slow, patient developing of a love that was more real and more vibrant than any picture I could ever hope to take. We had found our light, and we were no longer afraid of the shadows.